a single guitar strum. All that's required to bring back a wave of nostalgia for anyone who played the game which this accompanied. Greetings everyone, I am the Mad Scientist, aka Dr. J, and I welcome you to stay a while and listen for Through the Looking Glass. This is a series in which I, as a younger gamer who hasn't experienced many of the classic games of old, goes back through them to see what they were remembered for and how well they hold up today. In this video, I'm bringing the sequel to a genre-defining game, Diablo 2. I was never able to get very far past Tristram when it came to Diablo 2, but with the summer available to me, I couldn't resist trying it out. To say that Diablo has had an influence on the gaming industry would be an understatement. Before its time, there were two kinds of RPGs within the realm of video games. The first were the CRPGs, based off of the pen and paper RPG Dungeons & Dragons, making it more accessible to those without the time or friends with which to set up a game of D&D. Baldur's Gate is an example of this kind of RPG, and follows almost the same, if not completely the same, rule set in terms of combat, character creation, spells, and with its heavy emphasis on story and character interaction. The second was the roguelike, starting with, well, Rogue. Roguelikes were text-based dungeon crawlers that focused on random generation, turn-based combat, and most important to the genre, permadeath. The game is notorious for being absolutely unforgiving, fully willing to kill your character off due to random chance. Originally, Diablo was slated to be a variant on the roguelike, with a few key differences to set it apart. The camera was shifted from a top-down perspective to an isometric view, and the text-based graphics were to be replaced with claymation. Though they inevitably moved towards 2D sprites, another important change that happened set the stage for a new genre, real-time combat. This had been implemented in platformers and shooters before, but by placing it within the context of the addictive, just one more level nature of a roguelike, it created something truly special. Projectiles were no longer something that you had to hope your dodge chance or health was high enough to deal with, and instead was something you had to actively avoid. Clicking to do everything may have been simple, but by trading in the turn-based combat and much of the unfairness of the roguelike genre, while still maintaining the procedural generation and random loot drops, it made the game into something memorable to a lot of people. What propelled the game into legendary status, though, wasn't just the combat. The art style may have been pixelated, but it was gory, filled with blood, shadows, grim atmosphere, and Matt Uelmen's engrossing soundtrack all the way. When my dad finally let me play this at the ripe old age of 14, I was genuinely scared on more than one occasion, the most striking example being the first time I encountered a horned demon. You hear this thing yelling, and suddenly this towering horned beast comes out of the darkness to take down a good chunk of your health. It may not have had the greatest story ever, but it was good enough to grip you in with Deckard's Stay a While and Listen came, among others, to where you cared about trying to save the small town of Tristram. It didn't need a complex story, so it kept it focused on one objective. The town of Tristram is in peril because of all of these monsters. Go kill them all. With all that in the original Diablo, that gave quite an expectation for Diablo 2 to be the game that truly cemented this genre as something special, and in the eyes of many, it did just that. It took the genre away from the restrictions of the dungeon crawler and released you onto a world full of monsters. The game length was increased dramatically, giving fans a lot more to see and do within it, as well as more classes to play around with. The original 8-directional movement was replaced with more fluid motion, with a sprint bar giving you the ability to charge through sections faster. Instead of the spells you found being bound to whatever book you come across, each class was given skill trees with which they could customize their class to focus on different strengths. It was everything that fans at the time could have wanted and more, and even years later, many still played it. How well does it hold up today? Let's find out. Before I move on, I should clarify how much time I've spent with the game, as hardcore Diablo fans are going to wonder how much I've actually experienced. To get a sense of each class, I have beaten Act 1 with all of them. I have also dabbled a bit in Act 2 with the Necromancer and Amazon, have completed the game with the Sorceress and the Druid, and gotten a little bit into the Nightmare difficulty with the Sorceress. I recorded all of my time with the Sorceress for the normal difficulty, and according to the raw footage, it took me about 30 hours to complete, around 7 of which were spent in Act 1. I imagine that the timing for that was similar with the other classes, although probably less because I better understood what I was going up against, and because I tried to shake off my pick up every minuscule scrap of loot instinct. During my playthrough with the Paladin, I asked my brother to play a multiplayer session with me to see how well it worked, so he picked the Druid, and we were able to get to the outer cloister waypoint, roughly 2/3 of the way through Act 1, before I had to finish on my own. I have not done any hardcore characters, and all of my time spent with the game has been with the expansion Lord of Destruction, which means I cannot talk about the differences between it being enabled or not outside of the obvious differences, such as the added classes and extra act. With that out of the way, let's talk gameplay. Anyone familiar with the Diablo style genre is going to be instantly at home with the very simple combat system. Click to move, click to attack, right click to use spells, and hotkeys to switch between which spells are bound to the right mouse button. If you've never understood what the big deal is about the Diablo style game, this won't be the one to convince you, as it's relatively the same as every other Diablo style game to come out in the last few years. It's fairly simple and easy to understand, and what's built around it and complements it is often what makes or breaks a game in this genre. With that said, let's talk about what they add to make it a fun experience. The first of these is the procedural generation, which swaps around the monster types and locations, mini-bosses, loot, and the map itself. Run through a section of the map in this session, and the next time you jump in, you can run through that section again and find a different batch of monsters to knock down. There aren't too many problems with this, but there are some points where the mini-bosses are the same each time, which isn't a huge complaint but does seem a little odd. I swear, it's like they knew that corrupted archer with freezing arrows was annoying as hell, and decided they just had to ensure that you experienced the nuisance that was that fight. Even going through that in multiplayer was obnoxious. They also reuse assets with different coloration, which might make some sense considering that these were all demons and given the technological limitations of the time, but it is still annoying when a mini-boss is the color of the weakest variant of the Devil Kid. It's a minor complaint, as it was fairly obvious at the time I ran into it that it wouldn't be a weak monster, but I still wish they had put more effort into making the monsters more varied. The main variety within the game comes from the classes. The way that they utilize and expand on the typical RPG archetypes is fairly interesting, as having 5 classes in the base game and 2 more in the expansion allowed them to be creative with the implementation. The Barbarian and Sorceress clearly fall into the Warrior and Mage archetypes respectively, but beyond that, there is a decent amount of leeway. The Amazon is the closest that we come to a Rogue archetype, relying primarily on ranged weapons, but also does well with spears, making her a versatile hybrid between a warrior and a rogue. It's just a shame they didn't have a full-on rogue class, as the rapid-fire archer from the first game is definitely missed. The Paladin falls into the warrior archetype, but instead of focusing on being an awesome fighter himself, he has some combat spells and a lot of aura spells that affect your entire party. This does make him kind of a dump class though, made more to take advantage of multiplayer rather than being someone who's individually powerful. Part of the reason I enjoyed playing him was less for his abilities and more for the nonsense that often ensues when my brother and I try to cooperate within a video game. Don't do that again when I'm in the middle of them! Otherwise, you almost killed me! I'm not joking!
Sorry.
Don't act like that, you nearly killed me! Well, I know how much this is gonna turn into a co-optional play real quick. Real quick, can I attack you?
Say, hey, I'm
it's
having
not letting
a
me attack you.
howling good time.
The Necromancer, though, was a major departure away from what we had seen before. He was the first of the Summoner archetype, focused on raising skeletons and golems to do his bidding, rather than being individually powerful. He still had a couple of offensive spells, but his specialty was through curses and hordes of minions, which were interesting to interact with, even though it didn't hold up well when I was trying to beat Andariel, the final Act 1 boss. Within Lord of Destruction, there are 2 other classes that focus a bit more on the warrior archetype, to some extent. The Assassin is a quick duelist that is expert at singling out an enemy target and mauling them with dual claws. Her skills focus on that playstyle, as well as offering utility through different elemental traps and trinkets. It somewhat harkens back to the traditional sense of the rogue, that of the thief and manipulator rather than an archer or ranger. The druid is perhaps the biggest mashup of the archetypes though, being part area of effect mage, part summoner, and part badass fighter, unleashing a pack of wolves, molten balls of death, and transforming into a werewolf or werebear to smash through enemies himself. This guy turned out to be my favorite class, as it felt awesome to throw down a powerful AoE spell and then just go to town alongside the wolves and beat everything in sight to death. The main problem I have with the classes is that there don't seem to be very many interesting choices for them. The Barbarian is perhaps the best example of this, as he has a skill page specifically designed to passively improving his damage with various and sundry weapons. He does have some cool actives and a mobility spell, but even then, that highlights another problem with the classes. it usually doesn't feel like your choices are going to be meaningful, as it can sometimes feel like an obligation to get another spell just so you can get this other cool spell that you're more interested in. This is the Barbarian's Leap spell at level 1. Sure, it doubles on the first point if I rank it up, and it does have uses for getting away from crowds, but putting a lot into it means I give up on skill points that could go to being overall more powerful. This isn't the case across the board, as the Sorceress does have some cool stuff once you get further down into the skill trees, but leading up to that point, you sometimes have to get some spells that you won't use or don't need before you can get some of that cool stuff. There was a teleportation spell that would have helped me out a lot over in the Lightning Tree, but I missed it because it was right under the telekinesis spell, which I wasn't interested in. Beyond that, the only difference between Fireball and Glacial Spike is the type of damage it does, the effect it leaves on contact, and the mana cost. And it wasn't until I got to Act 5 that I really got to have fun with the cool spells, such as the Hydra and the Ice Ball of Death. The thing is, the way the game is balanced, the addition of the weapon passives and similar skills on the other classes is a necessary evil. Pretty much any class in this game can wield any weapon they want, assuming you can get the stats for it, apart from some specific items that can only be used by a certain class. Putting them in there means that you are encouraged to use those weapons over a more unconventional option, and then once you start getting the extra damage coming from those options, you have to start balancing around it, making the enemies overall more powerful and, to a greater or lesser extent, forcing you to use this. I didn't invest much of anything into them during my playthrough of the Barbarian, but I got a taste of how powerful they could be by virtue of my helmet, which gave me 2 points into the thrown weapon passive. If I hadn't attracted the attention of every single monster in Andariel's boss chamber, it would have been an easy fight because I would have never had to get up close to her. My throwing weapons were dealing a beating with substantially less risk to my character. I understand why they were put in there, but it feels like you're forced into making choices that don't leave as much of a tangible impact. Bear in mind though that I've always been a mage guy in every RPG I play, so I could very well be biased here. To be fair, there are some differences within the weapons and elemental damages. Swords set a consistent baseline, axes hit harder but are slower, maces are more powerful against undead, and flails have the greatest gap between the highest and lowest possible damage. With elemental damage, lightning is the most inconsistent but holds the highest potential, fire is the most damaging overall, and ice either slows or freezes enemies as they come at you. These variations do add a layer of strategy, somewhat validating the existence of the weapon passives, and also makes sense with how real medieval weapons actually did work. Since that they have to balance around that in the first place, I suppose it also somewhat forgives the game for not allowing you to quicker throw out a wide variety of spells. Even if you could swap abilities quickly, really large spells cannot be cast back to back, so the combat is much more subdued and down to your ability to kite the enemy effectively and manage your health and mana, rather than being all fancy with your monster slaying. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just not a design decision that I'm used to, coming from someone who's played a lot of Torchlight 2, and a design decision I don't know if I necessarily agree with. The Necromancer and Paladin have a similar issue, but it's not as much of a problem with the way they're designed. The Necromancer can only have one curse on a single enemy at any time, which means he has to make a hard decision between which of his many curses he should use, from reducing enemy damage to having them take extra damage, to make them take double the damage they deal to your allies or yourself. The Paladin has a similar thing going, but since that he has 2 skill trees instead of 1 focused around auras, it is much easier to be frozen with indecision. Fortunately, my main complaints with the classes are abated with the ones they introduced in Lord of Destruction, which are more interesting and have a lot more to offer. The fact that the Druid defies easy categorization and the Assassin has 2 very different playstyles you can make use of make them overall more interesting to dive into. For a little bit, I was able to recreate the Vanquisher from Torchlight, relying on traps and using a bow instead of dual claws, and it was both hilarious and surprisingly effective. I had a lot of fun with the Druid because I had the option to both play as a heavy fighter, transforming into some beast to further lay down pain, and also the option to play a more mage-oriented build. I touched on it a short while ago, but for the 5 of you who are able to find someone to play with you, let's talk multiplayer. It's a decent amount of fun, with monsters being buffed to keep it a challenge, and by allowing you to take advantage of class synergies and aura spells more effectively. Along with that, for some reason, while all of my single player sessions held steady at around 25 frames per second, occasionally jumping higher, it held at a solid 60 frames per second for the entire playthrough, at the expense of having your map progress get wiped after every session. Fortunately, there is no friendly fire in multiplayer, and if you join together in the same party, you appear to level up at the same rate and share experience for when both of you are near a monster's death. However, you do have to fight over loot drops, so it was kind of a good thing both of us were melee characters since we would both have access to the same loot at about the same time, even though he decided halfway through that the druid just had to be played with a bow. At least the game didn't outright prevent him from doing so. Still, there was more than one time when I picked up a bit of loot that wasn't as good as what I had, and sold it before we realized it would have been better if I had given it to him, so it is relying on you to communicate as to what the other has. Usually though, it doesn't matter as much who gets the fancy loot, because gold doesn't do much for you in the long run. There's almost no point in preventing each other from looking at it rather than just selling it. There is plenty of good loot to be found, but the shopkeepers usually don't have anything you would be interested in, apart from some of the awesome things you can get from the gambler. This is further compounded by your limited inventory space, which is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it makes it easier to determine which bits of loot that you collect are actually worth keeping and which ones you'll sell. Instead of having to compare 3 or 4 different items that take up the same equipment slot, which makes it easy to get overwhelmed by it all, Torchlight, I'm looking at you, you'll only have 2. And though the decision will usually be, it's not better, it means that the good loot is easier to find and compare because you aren't getting overloaded by it. On the other hand, if you do want every scrap of loot, prepare to use a lot of town portals and prepare to be forced to click every single little pile of gold individually until you have carpal tunnel. Also, don't hold down the Alt key if you have loot OCD, because loot can easily blend into the background and be missed, which might be what you want to save yourself some drama. To help you on your journey, you also get the assistance of mercenaries, who in the base game follow the rogue, warrior, mage archetypes. You start out with them after completing the second quest, defeating Bloodraven, and are granted a rogue in Act 1, a spearman in Act 2, and a mage of some description in Act 3. As nice as it is to have someone to help you out with what you encounter, it does highlight some of the problems with the AI. Perhaps it's easier to pick on the mercenaries since that they're more visible, but there were many times when they bugged out during all of my playthroughs, be it getting stuck on terrain, magically moving through walls, or just walking into a pack of monsters and then dragging them back toward me. This problem is exacerbated if you play the Necromancer, as when I was playing a bit with him, they got stuck on each other trying to get at an enemy monster. The majority of the bugs that I found with this game were directly linked to the AI. Knowing how less than ideal the programming was on the AI, they opted to put in a teleport feature for your mercenaries and minions, just in case you get too far away from them. Even then, that doesn't fix some of the nonsense with their pathfinding, as I had my rogue literally walk the long way around straight into a group of scarabs, being killed almost instantly. The base gameplay is still fun, but it's easy to nitpick because, as someone experienced with the genre, I can talk to death about the differences. A good number of them are design decisions that I might not agree with, but there are a couple other issues that I want to point out. The first of which being just a lack of information given to you. It's not going to tell you what that demon curse just did to you unless you have the time or bravery to go digging through your character screen to find out what happened. And even then, it might not be obvious. The only reason I can figure out what some of the curses are was because the spells you use on your classes are the same or similar ones that the monsters use. Even then, I've had to infer a couple times what different curses do, almost to my death a couple times before I realized what that stupid curse from those stupid succubi were throwing out onto me in the frozen caves. Along with that, I also found out things about the game which weren't obvious right off the bat. Here is a list of all the keys I stumbled across on my adventure. The squiggly line key, which controls the visibility of the potions in your belt. The Alt key, which you can hold down to view loot, although hiding monster health in the process. The O key, which I had to search through the options menu to find, which accesses your mercenary's inventory, and I only knew to look for it from a casual misclick. The P key, which is important during multiplayer to make sure you actually do share experience while playing, and to make sure your auras aren't actually affecting each other. It took my brother and I until our second session to figure that one out. The fact that clicking on a health potion while at full health still consumes the potion, so I hope you're not used to using the numbered keys for your spells, or half your potions are going to be gone before you get wind of it. This is also not a game that is afraid to prevent your resolution from going above 800 by 600, so that it can actually take advantage of an important part of the dungeon levels, light radius. What this does is essentially limit what you can see, which can make confrontations a lot scarier when you can hear and see the arrows flying at you, but not necessarily see who's shooting them. It adds to both the gameplay and the atmosphere of the world because of that, and makes the day-night cycle a lot more tangible, but even for the time, that was a small resolution, and it's annoying that we can't make it go higher. That also means that if you're using a 1080p monitor, it stretches to cover the entire screen, causing some initial issues with mouse control, and trying to go into windowed mode by using a specific target on a shortcut makes it look minuscule compared to everything else. You can hit the maximize key to have it maintain the aspect ratio if you don't mind some stretching, but then your cursor can travel outside of the screen, and for some reason Fraps wouldn't allow me to record the game in windowed mode. But now it's time to get all the hardcore fans truly mad at me for saying this, and it pains me to do so, but I don't like the boss fights. Part of this dislike is coming from the fact that I wasn't used to the more simplistic combat, which meant that it was less about figuring out the moveset of the enemy and working around that, and more of the same dodging projectiles, managing your health bar, and trying not to get completely mauled. They definitely looked different from each other, but they felt more like ramped up mini-bosses, especially since the AI that drives them is the exact same AI that drives literally every other character in the game. Iswal, a fallen angel, got caught in the same glitch that my rogue got stuck on when trying to get at me. I may be making too many comparisons to Torchlight 2 in my mind, as that's the Diablo style game I've spent the most time with, but even in that game, to some extent there are still some issues with the boss fights. However, Torchlight is able to get around this by having the bosses behave very differently, from wildly varying movesets to how their AI works to how effective certain weapons are against them. Because Diablo 2's combat is much more subdued, that means that it's harder to create that variety to make more interesting boss fights. And combine the fact that there is very little information given to you about how to tackle them, it isn't until you find yourself running in a circle for 10 minutes or end up getting one-shot because apparently someone forgot to mention your cold spells are absolutely useless. Come on, you fight Duriel in a desert. Why the hell is it that my ice spells do absolutely nothing to him? Also, because of that variance in damage within spells, there was one projectile from Mephisto, the final Act 3 boss, where it either severely hurt me or just one-shotted me. And it wasn't until the second time it happened that I realized what was going on. I thought Torchlight 2 was bad for having the final boss and some other monsters one-shot you, but Diablo isn't afraid to do it from Act 2 and onwards with Duriel. That's not even beginning to mention the wildly inconsistent difficulty, with Blood Raven, the first boss you fight ever, somehow being more challenging than the Summoner, whom you find in the Arcane Sanctuary in Act 2. I was shocked to find out how easy he was to take down. Shouldn't he be the harder one to deal with since it's the next freaking act? I know that it will be mentioned by veterans that it's somehow my fault for not picking the optimal build or something like that. Yes, I did have an opportunity before I faced off against Iswal to upgrade a fire spell to make the experience slightly less painful. Also, because I went a very spell and minion heavy focused build on my druid, Diablo completely mauled him with his AoE spells, and forced me to dash around using a very weak throwing axe as my only reliable damage. Could I have done better? Yes, but those were my first playthroughs with those classes. I could have looked up a build or something to know what to expect, but I was trying to get my raw opinion of the game and don't want that kind of input when I'm doing a critique. Even if I wasn't giving a formal opinion of the game, the argument that I should look up builds on my first character is bullshit. You cannot simultaneously praise character permanence and ability customization, which we heartily condemn Diablo 3 for not having, while saying that picking the supposedly wrong build is a bad thing. Sure, some are going to be more powerful than others. That is the nature of any game with even a shred of complexity, and it can be a chore if you don't find that overpowered combination, as I've mentioned. But you can't bandy about character permanence and customization while simultaneously condemning those who don't play the so-called right way. The whole point of character customization is to create a character that is your own, possibly making each one radically different from the other. It's what gives the game more replayability than it already has. I went through Act 1 with the Lightning Sorceress and had a radically different experience than with my Fire and Ice hybrid. But if I'm not doing the supposedly proper build, that's somehow a bad thing? If I was going hardcore mode, or was going much further into higher difficulties, then yes, I would check out a build to see what others have found to be effective. But that doesn't mean I'm going to completely copy it, or that it's a bad thing to be suboptimal. There may have been a PvP element to the game, but for the most part, this isn't a competitive game. That's not the main draw of it, and no one is forcing you to watch me or pay attention to me. Come on, is it so hard to just enjoy a game? Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your outlook, death is meaningless on normal difficulty, since as mentioned before, gold doesn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things. All dying does is take away the gold you're carrying around on you, which means you can just stow all of your treasure away in your stash and you never have to worry about it. In harder difficulties, death does become more impactful, taking away experience towards your next level as well as gold, but that can easily be fixed up by just saving and quitting to reset all of your progress and then grinding the experience back. It's more of a threat of convenience than anything else, and depending on your outlook and how much time you have, it's not the most threatening thing ever. That being said, the boss fights are not the main attraction. They're supposed to be the icing on the cake, but if that icing doesn't taste very good, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth and would be better off left out. The problem is that because the boss fights are built up to so well, to have them turn out to be cheap, or realizing that death is only a chore rather than something to be avoided, it takes away from the story and tension of the fights as well. You're building up to this epic confrontation where you're going to chase down the prime evils, and when you get close to one, a lesser evil comes in and punishes you for having only one fire spell. I didn't expect an easy fight, but I expected them to be more fair than they were, and since this is a game that doesn't tell you what you're getting into, from what damage the enemy does to what resistances they have, until you actually fight them, it's really hard, if not impossible, to create that sense of fairness without the game turning into a check the wiki experience. And if I wanted that, I would go play something else. Once again though, it seems like Lord of Destruction came to the rescue, with the boss fights there being better crafted overall. The fight with the Ancients, the Guardians of Mount Ariat, was made more challenging by the fact that you can't back out halfway through, and if you die, it resets the area. That means it forced you to actually ensure that you could take them on, which did prepare me for fighting Baal later on with both my Druid and Sorceress. I was able to overall enjoy the boss fights more, especially the final fight with Baal, because of that, and it did leave a very good final impression. Even if the boss gauntlet, where he summons a bunch of monsters from various points of the game, was more than a little tedious. For minions of destruction, they sure don't like to get destroyed, do they? With that said, it's time to move on to the story aspects, and a good portion of the boss fights also demonstrates one of the main problems that has been plaguing this genre for a while now. But you don't have to take my word for it, Deckard Cain spells it out quite well.
I know it seems you have always been one step behind, my friend, but look at it this way. You have evil on the run.
You were too late to stop the rogue monastery from being corrupted. You were too late to stop Diablo from freeing Baal and imprisoning Tyrael in his place, having to deal with Duriel instead. You were also too late to stop the prime evils from uniting or to prevent Baal from corrupting the World Stone. Despite the fact that the Dark Wanderer can't exactly walk all that fast, you're always one step behind him! Come on, Diablo. I've known people who were terminally late. We all have, but this is ridiculous. The game may have been a lot shorter if we had arrived in time to fight alongside Tyrael as we try and stop Diablo from freeing his brother, but it would have also made for a really epic confrontation. Or, we could have arrived while the Rogue Monastery had begun to be corrupted by Andariel, so we could fight what at first appears to be a losing battle, up until we get an opportunity to strike at Andariel herself and secure the monastery before it falls completely. That major gripe aside, the story is once again fairly basic. Demons have risen or are rising from where they were imprisoned long ago, and you need to go punch them in the face. How the story is told and put together, though, does make it somewhat memorable. As you move along, each character that you play will have something slightly different to say. While my sorceress was enchanted by the arcane sanctuary, after going through the area, my druid wanted nothing to do with the place. With the NPCs, you don't just have static shopkeepers, you have Drognin and Geed. You don't just have quest givers, you have Akara and Deckard Cain. They can give you advice, backstory, and to the patient, some useful hints as a reward for digging deeper.
Ancient lore has it that while Andariel was spawned in the burning hells, she is not fond of fire.
Much of what happens and who these people are is told through how they interact with you and what they say about each other, even if they end up repeating a decent amount of dialogue if you try and gossip with them too often. Also, some of them will recognize you as a certain character, and change their first interaction with you and some of their gossip in response to that, which gives more of a sense of agency, that you are a part of this world and can leave a substantial impact.
Welcome to Koras, young sorceress. Few come willingly to this ancient city anymore. I hope you brought your wits with you, for sanity is in short supply here. My name is Ratley. I am a sorcerer skilled in metalwork. It'd be a pleasure to help you. I don't have many customers these days. Though my own magic is only useful for making enchanted weapons, I'll bet yours will put an end to this terrible evil once and for all. May the spirits of Skatzim watch over and protect you.
You aren't forced to listen through any of the side characters, which is kind of a good thing considering it's less than stellar in places, the most extreme example being the rogue's blacksmith, Charcy. As per usual, it also has some of Blizzard's silliness sprinkled in once in a while.
When speaking of the dead, it is best to remain cryptic.
It's a shame that the mercenaries weren't more well developed beyond just being glorified minions, but considering that they do have health bars and can die, that might have been for the best. Your involvement in the story is all up to you, which is a good compromise between those who care about story and those who just want the next awesome piece of loot. I will give them credit for doing a good job with introducing you to the world, as even if you're unfamiliar with the game or genre, it won't be too hard to pick up on. Right off the bat, Wariv, a member of a trade caravan, walks up to you, signaling that he wants to talk with a short line of dialogue and the exclamation point above his head. That piques your attention, and after you speak with him, he encourages you to get to know your way around the rogue monastery by asking you to find Akara, the rogue's spiritual leader. She sends you out into the wilderness, and just in case you wander off the beaten path, there is a rogue waiting for you to let you know that you should complete objectives before moving forward, teaching you to explore the whole area and complete the quests within them before you try and take on more powerful monsters. The waypoint after it helps you understand how to save the game and to progress further, and then from there, it unleashes you to enjoy the experience. The cinematics that play in between each act don't focus on your adventures, which would only end up repeating bits and be hard to fit into a specific scenario, but are used to help expand on what's happening as we're trying to catch up to, and eventually stop, the prime evils. Told through the eyes of Marius as he follows the Dark Wanderer, we get a sense of the evil that's starting to plague the land through his raspy voice and cowardly demeanor, as he tells you what you were too late to see for yourself. Despite its predictability, there is one good twist at the end that, had I known I would find time to play this game, would not have spoiled myself on. Before Lord of Destruction was released, technically, evil had escaped. You may have defeated two of the prime evils, Diablo and Mephisto, but the third one, Baal, had eluded you. In the end, what Marius thought was the Archangel Tyrael, whom he had been telling his story to, was Baal in disguise, only revealing himself after his soul stone was handed over to him. Though terror and hatred may have been contained, destruction was still out there. That was a nice twist at the end, if only for the sake of a cliffhanger, and even though I was spoiled on it, I can still appreciate it, if only for this epic shot as Baal walks out. It wasn't until the expansion that we were finally able to shut down Baal, after he had run rampage through another part of Sanctuary. The tone and setting are the best way that this game conveys itself, and ironically, the dated graphics and limited engine actually help in that regard. My dad remembers a quote from Thrush's firing squad asking, when confronted with the game, who puked on the screen. In a sense though, despite not even being up to par with games that were released that same year or earlier, it worked for the sake of the story and atmosphere. This isn't a happy world filled with rainbows and unicorns. Unless rainbows are made of blood and unicorns are demons in disguise, of course it's not going to look pretty. The actual characters in the animations don't look good. We can definitely do better CGI people today, but that added a decent amount in and of itself, reminding us that this place has definitely seen better days. Marius especially, after seeing the rogue monastery be overtaken by evil, and then following the Dark Wanderer, is in terrible shape. In other words, pretty much what you would expect from someone who can't allow himself to sleep, lest he return to the memories of the trauma he went through. About the only characters that do look good in this game are in the class selection screen and the Archangel Tyrael, the latter of which made easier to pull off because they didn't need to animate a face. Also, can I just pilfer those wings and keep them forever, please? The atmosphere of the game is living proof that story and gameplay don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. Even within the gameplay, the fact that light radius actually exists makes the world more grim, makes the combat more tense, and in some cases make the area you're in a little scarier. The most important thing about fear isn't what we know and can confront, it's what we don't know. Light radius adds that air of mystery, and creates the unknown, to where you may not necessarily know if you're charging into a pack of monsters until that pack of monsters is about to hit you in the face, or has fired a couple of projectiles into you. Charging into the fray in later areas definitely wasn't the healthiest thing for me as a sorceress, as I found out all too quickly. As for the rest of it, you won't even care that there shouldn't be any crosses around because there is no God and therefore no Jesus, merely the angels and demons, because it fits well with the aesthetic and art style they were hearkening to. You won't care that it seems like every monster is idling around waiting for a hero to kill them, because in the few times when they do come out of unique places, such as the sand maggots burrowing underground and the overgrown frogs in Act 3 emerging from the river, it stands out and is a nice change of pace. Through a clever use of geometry, they were also able to simulate a 3D space without actually being one, making it appear like you were going up a flight of stairs even though the game logic still has you on a flat plane. The fact that the stairs were usually where the AI got stuck on the most is further proof that there is some more complex geometry going into them, as you can't just go into a straight line to move through them. Another cool illusion among the Arcane Sanctuary involves these pillars, which I spent far too long geeking over when I realized the optical illusion. Are those pillars holding up an invisible ceiling, or is the floor above you? Either answer in the illusion is technically correct, and made further intriguing by the fact that it's the Arcane Sanctuary where this happens, and I'll let the sorceress explain why.
This place actually distorts reality. Fascinating.
Matt Uelmen's soundtrack is the icing on the cake, and in a good way this time, serving to establish the mood of the area, to convey a sense of what this place is like. All of the instruments that he uses fit the aesthetic and setting to help add to it, even though you may not have noticed the steel drum notes peeking in here and there. It relies primarily on percussion, voice, and some wind instruments when out in the world, using that as a backdrop to add tension into the atmosphere as a whole. While keeping most of the melodic themes contained to the towns. This creates a nice contrast between the outside, where you can potentially be attacked at any time, and the towns where you are completely safe, at least until you venture back out. There are only two times when this is broken. First, the music in Lord of Destruction conveys more of an epic struggle rather than a tense situation, by adding a lot more orchestral instruments. It doesn't completely abandon the old tense music, especially when you go down into the caves, as there is still plenty of percussion backing up the orchestra, but it seems to be more of a transition between original Diablo 2's music and Torchlight 2's soundtrack. The second time the theme was broken was in our return to Tristram, which was jarring for me the first time I played it. I never thought I would have to fight while listening to the music that always meant safety in the original game. That is definitely my nostalgia talking when I think back to when I first went through that area in Diablo 2. I couldn't help but feel a little sad that the place where I had always felt safe was now a fiery ruin. Even if you don't have nostalgia for the original Diablo, I dare you to listen to this oboe that they added to the end of it without feeling a little sadness or sorrow. The best way to describe Diablo 2 is that it took a very simple idea, running around a world clicking on a bunch of monsters to kill them before they can kill you, put them in a very simple engine, and made it one of the most beloved games of its time, despite not being a graphical powerhouse even compared to games that came out before it. If you ever need living proof that art style and gameplay will sell over graphics, this is one of many games you can point to. You've heard that it definitely has its problems nowadays, and I definitely have my bias coming from someone who enjoys Torchlight 2, but is it worth going back to? In my opinion, maybe. Despite all the good things that lay within it, I can only cautiously recommend it to most people for reasons that are inherent to the game and the gaming industry as a whole. First and foremost, this is not a game that respects your time in any way. There are far too many things that are unexplained in an age where we have tooltips and UI telling us every relevant detail, and if you only want to dabble in the game, don't even think about it. Instead of being given all difficulty levels from the start and balancing around that, beating the game on one difficulty level unlocks the next difficulty for that character, with the assumption that character is geared up and ready to brawl with much tougher monsters. Granted, most people who are really into the game aren't going to care too much, but it is annoying that we can't immediately jump into a harder challenge that's balanced around it, especially since once we get there, our ability choices become which of these do I want to upgrade rather than which one of these cool new spells do I want. Perhaps the worst part though, is that your progress is bound to waypoints. Essentially, Diablo 2 treats every session that you do as its own game, which means that every time you quit, all of the monsters, loot, and quest objectives respawn. As I've said before, in multiplayer it becomes worse, with your entire map progress getting wiped along with that. Need to stop at the 5-minute mark because of something? Prepare to either leave it running on your computer for a long time, or maybe just losing those 5 minutes altogether, as well as any loot you may have accidentally left lying around. There are plenty of ways that you can lose significant progress through no fault of your own. If the power goes out, a parent or child needs your attention for a while, or you misclick the save button, well, sucks to be you. Oh crap, I hit save and exit. Oh crap. I'm gonna have to grind through that now. No! I probably lost my Tome of Town portal too. Hell. This is why you don't add the system like that in these games. This is why. Just in case something like that happens. So now I'm likely gonna have to grind through that area again. Yeah, another charm. In a sense, it does speak to the addicting nature of the game, because despite that level of obligation in order to actually complete all of it, there are still so many people who love it to death. At the same time, that obligation is its downfall, as there were plenty of times where it did feel like an obligation to finish an area, rather than something I should be enjoying. It was a good move to please the hardcore crowd, who will and did sink tons of hours into it for long stretches of time, but terrible for everyone else. The reason why my dad, who is the one who got me into the Diablo style genre with the original, never got to finish was for this very reason. Despite grinding for a long time while trying to find a waypoint, he couldn't find it and had to stop for good. And that's a shame, because there's a good game here if you have the time for it, but will you necessarily have that time? The only reason I did is because I had a summer at my disposal, and the date of release on this video will tell you how much I've had to deal with since then, be it other videos, academics, or other extracurricular stuff that kept me from wrapping it up until now. My second reason isn't related to the game itself, but to the gaming industry as a whole. Diablo was the first of its kind, and Diablo 2 was the king of its genre for a lot longer. Now, we're living in a wonderful time for anyone with a passing interest in the Diablo-style game. For those who are newer to this series, you have Diablo 3, which might not be the game that hardcore fans asked for, but it is definitely easier for newcomers to get into. If you can get past the lack of character permanence and the always online DRM, you can have a good time with it. You can't create widely varying characters, but you also can't completely mess up the character and either have to start over or slog through some less than fun encounters. It's not a game that I personally would enjoy as much, but I can respect it for at least getting more people into the Diablo style genre. If you want the next logical step in the gameplay aspect, then you have Torchlight 2. Pretty much every single complaint I have with the gameplay is fixed here, at the expense of losing the story and atmosphere that helped propel the original Diablo 2 legendary status. Instead of accumulating all the gold and never having enough inventory space, they provide a lot more ways to sink a lot of gold into the world, be it enchantments, more options from the gambler, and just overall more loot to drop to fuel all of this awesomeness. The classes are a lot more unique and have many more interesting choices to make, and there aren't nearly as many skills that feel wasted. It's a really fun game that both my dad and I have enjoyed a little too much of. The art style did put a lot of people off, but if you want a pure conversion of Diablo 2 to the modern age, then you need look no further than Path of Exile. In all likelihood, those of you who played Diablo 2 are already still grinding away at this game, and with good reason. It does have some of the problems that Diablo 2 does, namely binding progress to waypoints, and throwing always online DRM doesn't help much, but the waypoints are more forgiving than before, and it's a free-to-play game in the fairest sense of the word, so there's very little reason to not try it out. The skill tree is replaced by an intimidating web of passives that improve your stats overall, with abilities being found in your socketables. Gold, rather than being something you accumulate a crap ton of and never use, is discarded entirely, replaced by a bartering system where the basis for buying and selling items are on enchantments to weapons and identify scrolls, which fits well into the setting of this game as a whole, namely that of a group of exiles cast away to a broken land for some real or perceived crimes they have committed. Coming straight from Diablo 2 into trying out Path of Exile to get footage ended up creating another reason why this video took so long to get done. It's not like I've spent a lot of time with this game either, but it's definitely a fun experience that I'm looking forward to slowly digging through, even if it means that the times in which I can do it are more limited than with Torchlight. Honestly, it's a great time to be a Diablo-style game fan, because there are all sorts of options for different players. The games I've mentioned certainly aren't the only ones, and won't be the last. Diablo 2 is definitely a great game, but unless you want to return to it to see how far we've come in terms of UI and graphics, there's very little reason to go back. It's a good Diablo-style game, but it's one of many now, and with a good number of high-quality titles on the market right now, Diablo 2 is the old-timer that runs the local bar and tells you of all the exciting stories about when he was young and wild. That being said, if this interested you, you can find both the original game and Lord of Destruction over on Battle.net. You'll find a game that is definitely aged, but is still the Diablo that many harken back to as a classic. Have fun if you decide to look into it, or into the myriad of other action RPGs out there, and may you not have to employ as many cheap tactics as I did. Thanks for staying a while and listening, and keep an eye on this channel for the next series of Through the Looking Glass. Now, if you'll excuse me,
I'm gonna party like it's $9.99.